The Sestina, like the villanelle, is a very intricate poetic form, even more intricate, even more requirements for repetition, a greater challenge for the poet to accomplish. The Sestina originates from a 12th century Provençal poet, Arnaud Daniel. He was known as a troubadour, and he, like the other troubadour poets, would have been members of a royal court. And in that royal court, they would have composed poems primarily to idealized women, love poems. But also there was a sense of play and performativity at work in this court. And certainly the Sestina can be thought of in the spirit of play and performativity. It requires a kind of virtuosity, a linguistic virtuosity, to compose a successful Sestina. Now, Dante and Petrarch, Italian poets, picked up on the Sestina and enjoyed the form themselves. Italian as a language with its many vowels that end words, the Italian language with its many vowels that end words, is more conducive to rhyme, certainly than English, and even more so than French. The first English Sestina came about in the 16th century. Edmund Spenser included a Sestina in a longer poem known as the Shepherd's Calendar, late 16th century again, and Sir Philip Sidney in Old Arcadia also included Sestina forms. But like the villanelle, the form largely went underground, if you will, until the late 19th century, underground in the English tradition, in English literary history. And in the late 19th century, the Sestina, like the villanelle, had a bit of a rebirth in the fin de siècle or aesthetic or decadent poets. Swinburne, a primary example with his Sestina of this. But the Sestina really picked up in the 1930s. Ezra Pound's famous Sestina, Altaforte, came around at that time. W.H. Auden wrote a Sestina as well, famous Sestina. And then throughout the 20th century, the Sestina was a fairly popular form to be such a highly intricate form. Elizabeth Bishop, who wrote the famous Villanelle One Art, wrote Sestina. And the Sestina continues to be used even today. Talk in a minute about why a poet might want to write a Sestina. Let me tell you what one is first. So a Sestina is a 39-line poem, 6 stanzas of 6 lines, 6 followed by a tercet, 3 lines known as the envoi, the envoy, we would say in an anglicized fashion. I'll tell you what that is in a minute too. Now, what is so difficult about the Sestina? Each of these 6 stanzas, not the final 3-line stanzas, each of the 6-line stanzas must end in the last set of words. But that's not enough. Each stanza changes the order of the same words in a regular fashion. There are rules for the changing of the final words of the stanzas. And then the 7th stanza, that 3-line envoi, must use all 6 of the words that have been used throughout the poem for the last words of the stanzas. You'll see 2 of the words in the first line of the tercet, 2 of the words in the second line of the tercet, and 2 of the words in the third line of the tercet. Are you bewildered yet? It's very difficult to hold this in your head. Usually the lines are 11 syllables long. Those are known as hendecasyllables, hendecasyllabic lines with 11 syllables. And again, these 11 syllables lines, there are 6 of them in each stanza. There are 6 stanzas of 6 lines. Each of these stanzas ends in the same set of words. Each stanza changes that set of words. And then we have a 7th stanza that is a 3-line envoi, which uses all 6 words. So all this will become clear when we start talking about an actual Sestina, the Sestina famous by Anthony Hecht, known as the Book of Yolek. But I'll just tell you, to give you a sense of the intricacy of the pattern, the order in which the words change. So the first stanza, let's imagine that we will number each word that ends each line of the stanza. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each of those numbers stands for a word that ends the line. In the second stanza, this shifts to 6, 1, 5, 2, 4, 3. Third stanza, 6, 4, 1, 2, 5. Fourth stanza, 5, 3, 2, 6, 1, 4. Fifth stanza, 4, 5, 1, 3, 6, 2. Sixth stanza, 2, 4, 6, 5, 3, 1. Bewildering. So it's a poem, it's a poetic form that invites radical repetition. So for this reason, the form, according to Anthony Hecht, is appropriate for expressing obsessiveness, a kind of monomania, being fixated on one idea to the point where you just can't stop talking about it. Other literary critics have said that the form, the Sestina, is appropriate to complaint. Why? Because it is so rule-driven that if a poet is writing in such a rule-driven form, there will be frustration, the sense of having to submit to rules that one may not want to submit to. And using the Sestina, one can dramatize this. Another literary critic says that the Sestina is important for expressing tension, a tension between high artifice, a world of mathematical proportion where there's a place for everything and everything in its place, and messy, random human experience, which does not, for most of us, feature mathematical proportion. Yet another literary critic has said that more recent examples of the Sestina exemplify a sense that poems are not able to express universal truth, are not able to express essential elements of self, but that poems, like all art, like all linguistic representations, are a kind of form of entertainment, of performativity. And the Sestina is especially inviting to certain contemporary poets because it is a poem of performativity. I mean, it's highly entertaining. Strangely enough, the Sestina, for all of its seemingly rigid order, does sort of capture the rhythms of a conversation. If I'm having a conversation with someone, there is a lot of repetition. I went to the movie last night, and it was very powerful. Oh, you went to a movie last night? It was powerful? Yeah, I mean, it was really powerful. That movie was really powerful, amazing, powerful. Yeah, well, I saw the same movie. I thought it was awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I guess that movie was awesome. So on and so forth. So for all of its artifice, you can see how the Sestina, strangely enough, might capture the rhythms of actual conversation. So what I've done is I've suggested there are at least 5 effects of the Sestina. One would be it can express a kind of obsessiveness or monomania. And that's what Hecht himself says. Another effect of the Sestina, perhaps, is it invites complaint because of the rigidity of the form can crash against someone who doesn't want to follow the rigidity of form, who wants to complain about such rigidity, not only of the form, but maybe about life in general. A third way to think about the Sestina is that it expresses a tension between a desire for mathematical symmetry, artifice, and the messy random quality of life. A fourth way to think about the Sestina is that it is simply entertainment. It is heightened performativity and requires a virtuosity that is pleasing to readers and listeners. And finally, one can say that the Sestina is especially apt for expressing the rhythms of everyday conversation. Now let's get concrete about a Sestina by looking at a famous Sestina by Anthony Hecht, 20th century, 21st, early 21st century. America mainly thrived in the 20th century, though. Lived into the 21st century, I think he did. But Anthony Hecht really thrived in the second half of the 20th century. Anthony Hecht's famous Sestina, the Book of Yolek. Now, this poem is about a young boy named Yolek who is killed during World War II by the Nazis. He is taken from a home for children and put into a concentration camp where he dies. Hecht himself served in World War II. He was there at the liberation of the Flossenburg concentration camp. So he's writing from personal experience when he writes about the camps of the Nazis during World War II. Another source of this poem is that he read a collection of pieces on the Holocaust, Hecht did. And in that collection, he read about a man, let me get his name right, Janusz Korczak, who ran a home for children. And when the Nazis came to take the children, he could have gone his own way, but he decided to stay with the children. He ended up dying with the children. And in that account, Hecht read about a boy named Yolek, and another little boy too. The other little boy has bad lungs in the account, in the collection, but in his poem, Hecht gives the bad lungs to Yolek. So Hecht himself said that this is a poem that explores the tension between his own personal memories and memories that are expressed in books that he has read. So it is an autobiographical poem in this way. It really captures this tension between Hecht's own experience, his own memories of his own life, and these descriptions of the experiences of young children who were forced to go into the camps during World War II, the Nazi camps where they died. The Book of Yolek. It sounds like Hecht is suggesting that there's something biblical about this poem, like the Book of Job, you might think, or the Book of Jeremiah, books in the Bible, the Book of John. This is how books of the Bible are referred to. So there's almost a sense here that this is a sort of a lost book of the Bible. So the poem has very powerful religious sensibility. In particular, it's aware of the Jewishness, the Judaism of Yolek and the others Jews who suffered at the hands of the Nazis during World War II. But also it's very much aware of the sources of anti-Semitism. I say this because the epigraph to the poem, the opening lines of the poem, are a German translation of a line from the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 7, where Pontius Pilate is saying to the Jews, why do you want this man named Jesus to be killed? And they say, basically, we have a law, and according to the law, he must die. Now, Hecht renders this passage in German, in the German used by Martin Luther in his translation of the New Testament. Martin Luther was virulently anti-Semitic, and the idea that somehow the Jews killed Jesus has been, historically speaking, a source of anti-Semitism throughout the world, and remains so. So here is the line in German: Wir haben ein Gesetz und nach dem Gesetz soll sterben. We have a law, according to the law he must die. All right, so that's the opening of the poem, and then we move in to this extremely personal, lovely, pastoral memory of the poet. I'm going to go through stanza by stanza where he says, "The doused coals fume and hiss after your meal of grilled brook trout, and you saunter off for a walk down the fern trail. It doesn't matter where to, just so you're weeks and worlds away from home, and among midsummer hills have set up camp in the deep bronze glories of the declining day." So this is a memory of a campfire where trout was cooked, trout that was caught from a nearby brook. And after the meal, one goes off for a relaxing walk among ferns. No purpose, can go anywhere he wants. You're just away from home. Don't have to worry about the everyday cares of the world. It's midsummer. You've set up camp. And even though the day is declining, pushing toward night, the absence of the sun, there are deep bronze glories. So the ending words of this stanza are meal, walk, to, home, camp, day. And each of these words has a very specific meaning in this stanza. Meal is one particular meal on one particular camping trip. Walk is a relaxed walk on this camping trip. To, where to is simply a preposition. Home would be the home that is one's ongoing domicile, as opposed to being on a camping trip, a brief camping trip. Camp would simply be the tent, one imagines, and day is a time of declining glory. Now we shift in stanza 2 to similarly pastoral language, but now there's a sense that the words are not simply personal, but they're part of a larger communal meaning that has to do with regulations and rules. Now notice I've used that word pastoral more than once. This poem is a hybrid. It's both a pastoral evocation of the beauty of nature, the calm of nature, the tranquility of nature, but also it's a poem that grieves the loss of a person, Yolek in this case. So the first stanza, meal, walk, to, home, camp, day, these words get rearranged in the second stanza to day, meal, camp, walk, home, to. You remember peacefully an earlier day in childhood. Remember a quite specific meal, a corn roast and bonfire in summer camp. That summer you got lost on a nature walk. More than you dared admit, you thought of home. No one else knows where the mind wanders to. Now here in this stanza, the one before, the pronoun you is used, a second person pronoun. It seems like Hecht is referring to himself as a you, but also he's referring to us. So there's a sense that we all kind of share in this memory. Now here, the speaker remembers summer camp, not simply one particular camping trip. So there are rules, it's a community. And one goes on a nature walk. One doesn't just wander out wherever he wants to go. There's a trail in place. And when you think of home here, there's a kind of homesickness or a nostalgia. So there's a move from the personal to the communal, from the free and casual to the regulated and the communal. Now, breathtakingly, Hecht turns this preposition to in the third stanza into the number 2. Notice the shift in syntax. The 5th of August, 1942. So we're suddenly pulled back into a long time ago, and is a very specific historical date. It was morning and very hot. It was the day they came down, the 5th of August, 1942. It was morning and very hot. It was the day they came at dawn with rifles to the home for Jewish children, cutting short the meal of bread and soup, lining them up to walk in close formation off to a special camp. So we have, again, the shift in the order of the words, to, day, home, meal, walk, camp, and we have a radical shift in the meaning of the words. So to, simply a preposition that points, becomes the part of a terrible date when these children were forced out of the home for Jewish children to the concentration camps. And day here is not just a day you can enjoy, but it's a horrific day that marks a tragedy in human history. And home here is not where one might have grown up with one's parents, for which one might be nostalgic, but home is the home for Jewish children, where orphans are living, Jewish orphans are living. And the meal is not something pleasant like grilled trout from a brook. It's a meal of bread and soup, the not very tasty fare that a home for children might have. And the walk here is not some lovely saunter. It's not some nature walk, but it's a forced march to the camps. A special camp. This is not a summer camp. This is the concentration camp. So you see how in this shift, each word takes on a different meaning. This is the power of the Sestina. There are repetitions of the same words, but the words take on different meanings as they are deployed throughout the poem. And so the poem goes. How often you have thought about that camp? Is the poet referring to himself? Seems to be, but also he's referring to us. Yeah, we share in this memory. We share in these experiences. We're responsible to some extent, as he is, for what has happened. How often you have thought about that camp, and as though in some strange way you were driven to, and about the children and how they were made to walk. Yolek, who had bad lungs, who wasn't a day over 5 years old, commanded to leave his meal and shamble between armed guards to his long home. So a move here to a memory not of all the children, but of Yolek, one child with bad lungs. And he's being forced to his long home, which is not the home for children, but death. Shift again, stanza 5. To a new pronoun. We are, not you. We're approaching August again. So it seems like the poet has gone from August of 1942 to this August, whatever time he's writing in. So he's moved again to the present. It will drive home the regulation torments of that camp Yolek was sent to, his small unfinished meal, the electric fences, the numeral tattoo. Here notice that to is rendered not as preposition, not as number, but as tattoo. The tattoos that the Nazis would use to mark those that they were forcing into the concentration camps. We're approaching August again. I'm starting that stanza over. It will drive home the regulation torments of that camp Yolek was sent to, his small unfinished meal, the electric fences, the numeral tattoo, the quite extraordinary heat of the day. They were all forced to take that terrible walk. So this stanza puts the present of the poet and the past together, talking about how the poet, every August, it seems, remembers in particular this horrific event from August of 1942. Whether on a silent, solitary walk or among crowds, far off or safe at home, you will remember helplessly that day and the smell of smoke and the loudspeakers of the camp. Wherever you are, Yolek, you will be there too. His unuttered name will interrupt your meal. So this poem now moves into full elegiac mode. How will we remember Yolek? How will the poet remember Yolek? How will we remember Yolek? And by extension, how will we remember the horrors of World War II? How will we remember the horrors of the Nazis? How will we remember the horrors of anti-Semitism still going on now? So the poem shifts from pastoral to elegy. It moves from very personal to a more public. And it moves ultimately from sort of casual meandering of a carefree life to the idea that history is horrific and tragic. And we will remember Yolek wherever we are. We must remember. So the poem is as much a memory of Yolek as a call for all readers to remember Yolek. And now finally we have the envoi, the final 3 lines, where each of the 6 words that end the stanzas, the lines of the stanzas, are repeated, 2 in each line. Prepare to receive him in your home someday. There we see home and day. Though they killed him in the camp, there's camp, they sent him to, there's two, he will walk in as you're sitting down to a meal. Walk and meal. So there's a collapsing here of present and past. Yolek will come sit down to meals in our houses. We must remember him. There's a collapsing of the poet's own memories and the memories of the readers as well. So you can see how Hecht is using the Sestina in this kind of obsessive way, obsessively using the same words, of course, as all Sestinas do, but more so sort of obsessing over what does Yolek mean? How do we remember Yolek? What does it mean that we remember Yolek? There is, as Hecht would say, the Sestina kind of monomania here. A desire to think not only about Yolek, but to think about what is a camp, what is a walk, what is a meal, and how these words take on radically different meanings based on the context. So that is my account of the Sestina, and in particular Anthony Hecht's Sestina, the Book of Yolek.